Okay, and to the people in the room as well, I apologize for the slight delay, but we were due some technical issues. Okay, we managed to escape without that many for the last 2 weeks. It was about time. So, welcome to the last of our presentation set, the last of the 4. We are going to be talking about data insights today. Okay. Gonna start with the usual, have a look at what we're gonna go through today. Okay, introduction will be general advice, time per question, good technique, things like this. We're then going to go through each of the question types individually, again, giving more specific advice that will relate sort of per question. And then lastly, we're going to move on to the practice questions. You will notice I have put predominantly data sufficiency. That's because more so this week than previous weeks, I need to give a little bit of information on how this is going to be, specifically how this is going to be different from last year. I suspect none of you did it last year, but if you did, I want to highlight something. So this year is the first year that the NMAT has moved to the Focus Edition. Okay, of all the sections which have been affected by this change, this is very much going to be the most. Okay, so when we're going through these, I'm going to have to apologize in advance, because one of the ways that this section has been affected more than the previous section is this is being more affected by the fact that it's an online version this time. Not lots, but a decent amount of this presentation will be me talking you through what it will look like on your computer, but lots of that is going to be hard for me to replicate with a presentation. The other thing is, I hope you're willing to not shoot the messenger, because I can give you all of the practice questions the book gave me, but unfortunately, the practice questions are heavily tending towards the data sufficiency, because this was in a different section last year, but we still have a ton of practice questions for me to use. For the others, I'm afraid they haven't supplied me with that many practice questions, so I'm afraid I can't supply you with as many practice questions. So the question type and advice will be sort of mainly informative. I'm not necessarily going to be able to offer you practice questions for all of the different types. Okay, so it's going to be good news for a bit of a bad reason here. It is going to be, I suspect, our shortest of the presentations. Just to be clear, I'm expecting it to be closer to 2 hours than 3, and I suggest that we instead make it an hour, 20 minutes gap, and then an hour for that reason. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get on. Okay. For those people who have been here for all the previous parts, you'll actually notice that this is the highest time per question of all the different varieties we have looked at so far. This is broadly for the similar reason as the verbal reasoning, the language skills. They allow you a little bit more time for some of these questions, which will involve reading a decent chunk of text. Okay, but you actually have not only over a minute, but you actually have over 2 minutes per question here. Notice even though it's 2¼ minutes, I've included that in minutes and seconds so that no one makes the quick confusion of thinking that's 2 minutes 25 seconds. It's not. It's 2 minutes 15 seconds. For this topic, okay, we're going to be using parts that I have taught you in these previous lectures, but I want to be exactly clear on what you should be used to or what you can expect. I want you to review your data, your basic math skills, your general data analysis, and the verbal reasoning. Okay, for verbal reasoning, think about the intersection, think about the crossover between that strictly logic-based one and the more logic-based sections of the Hone Your English Skills part. This will be the first time here that I'm referring specifically to how it will look like on a computer, etc. Okay, multiple questions per screen will sometimes appear, but it's worth mentioning once you go past, you cannot go back. Okay, so in previous exams or in the previous sections, I may have recommended, you know, do the questions in order of ease, right? Do the questions you find easiest first, and so on until you reach the hardest question. For this reason, I cannot give that advice this week, okay? You need to take them as they come. And a last bit of good news here is this last section does use maths, of course, but actually considering this will take less demanding mathematics than our dedicated math section we were looking at last week. This is the one they've decided to give you a calculator for. So I'm not going to have to teach you a little subsection of small mental math tricks. You will have an inbuilt calculator. It will be one of the side tabs for you. Okay? Just want you to know that. So let's look at the question types. We have 5 to go through. They are here. So we're going to be going into a more detailed rundown as you expect, but let me give you a slight overview of what you should be expecting here. To me, the multi-source reasoning and the two-part analysis go together quite nicely. They are both about cross-referencing, you know, different types of data presentation. Maybe you're comparing a graph and some text, or you're comparing a table and some graphs and trying to reach conclusions across both of them. Now, there will be differences in these types of questions. They are not the same, but we'll get there when we get there. Table analysis and graphics interpretation are really what they seem like, right? I'm not going to tell you a ton of details on those. One will be visual data representation. One will be from a table. That's really what you should expect for those two. Lastly, aside from the fact that, as I said, it's the question type we have most practice questions on, we're going to spend a little bit longer on data sufficiency, mainly because I can talk about table analysis, multi-source reasoning, etc. But you've probably done some of that before. You have an idea. I don't need to sit here and tell you how to read a table. The difference being, unless you've done a specific exam which has this sort of question in before, the data sufficiency will be sort of the most new to you. I'm not expecting anyone to have any pre-existing ideas of what that term means. Okay, First up, multi-source reasoning. Okay, I'm going to give you an idea of what you can expect from these questions, a little bit more detail, and then I will go on to giving you advice on how to tackle it yourself. So, again, notice that the first part of my description is simply what you will see. Okay, you're going to have 2 to 3 tabs. Normally, one of them is going to be some amount of text proposing a task, giving you an idea of what the goal is here. And then the 2 other tabs, let's say there are 2 other tabs, will be relevant data, prices, restrictions, etc. And then you will have to select your answers based on the information in those tabs, obviously with an eye on the task, like what are they actually looking for you to do. There will be 3 questions per set of tabs, and these will appear on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, lots of these are going to be traditional multiple choice, but others will be conditional statements. I'm going to use that phrase again later, but it's going to mean something slightly different. Okay, here it just means they are giving you a certain condition. Is it true? Is it false? Can you meet that condition? Can you not, given the data and the situation provided? You need to you need to mark 1 answer per row. Okay, and don't get complacent on those. For all but one of these, okay, for 3 out of the 4 which have tick box answers, it's going to be 1 per row, but don't get complacent on that because there's 1 in the middle which is going to be 1 per column, and I don't want you getting confused there. Okay, some of these tips will be returning advice that will be relevant for each question. Some of these will be more question specific. So answer only using the information provided not only applies to several of these question types, it's applied to several of my presentations as a whole. Okay, no bringing in your outside ideas, but good news, that also means you don't have to have pre-existing education on any of these topics. They want you to only use what you are given. Spend some amount of time really digging into each source, analyzing it almost within its own right, maybe seeing, oh, I can see this one is the most expensive, but this one takes the longest. Is, you know, are they getting cheaper as they take longer? Can you see some pattern? Is there one row which really sticks out? Say it's the cheapest and the quickest. Having those small ideas in your head will often cut down the time that it takes you to sort of answer the question once you've read the answers. It will, let's say, give you an idea of which one to try first. Okay, you do have the longest time per question here, but 2 minutes, 15 seconds is still not as long as you would like it to be. Similarly, I want you to make sure you're reading the whole question, or read that text tab fully in its entirety. Make sure you understand what you should be looking for when you go into the data tabs. Because if you go into the data tabs really quickly, you do this nice sort of mental analysis that I'm suggesting, and then you read back the text and realize, oh, I've been thinking about this wrong, or I have not been targeting this in the way which I should have. You can have spent as much time as you want doing that analysis. It could all turn out to be for nothing. This is exactly why I've written this part at the bottom. Okay, the questions will not always be exactly the same. Sometimes they're looking for you to spot conflict in the information. Where does the information source A contradict information source B, for example? Most frequently, they're asking you to combine information across the differing sources. Some simply ask you to find which data is relevant. Okay, don't dive headfirst into the data until you know what you should be looking for. Maybe you're going to find a couple of points of conflict, and then that's not even the question. So invest that time wisely. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like on your screen. This budget tab gives you an idea of the context, okay? We're looking at laboratory tests at a certain price. Okay, it's for a museum. So maybe we're looking at carbon dating, etc. But this gives you key information. It gives you the total budget. It gives you some information about what that equals in terms of these different tests. Okay, so there will often be information that can get you to an answer rather than just information that can get you to the question. So as I said, do not dismiss this topic or this tab too quickly. Now, this is one of the points where we have problems surrounding having an online test in a physical book. I can poke the word artifact all I want, it's not changing tab. Okay, but this is what you should be expecting. I would expect under the artifacts tab, maybe it says something surrounding size and weight, for example. And then on the next screen, when you're looking at the techniques, it has a price per kilogram or price per size, something like that. So you will need to cross-reference between the tabs. But that's what you should be expecting, though, as explained, I can't directly show it to you. What I can show to you, however, is an example of this conditional statement question. So for each of the following artifacts in the museum, select yes if based on the museum's assumption a range of techniques for the object's creation can be obtained using one of the techniques in the manner described. Otherwise, select no. Okay, so we're looking, can we sort of age or evaluate, etc., each of these? Do we have the budgetary requirements? Do we have a technique which applies to them? Maybe certain techniques only help within a certain age range, but for example, maybe this fired clay pot is from 12,000 BCE, and this technique will not help you with it, okay? Make sure that you're intaking all this information before you decide, yes, it does meet that condition, or no, it does not. Again, one per row. So by that, I mean you very much cannot select both yes and no for that fired clay pot. Okay, one answer per row. Okay, as I said, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give you anything I was not I did not have access to myself. That will be the information for the first task. Let's look at table analysis. Okay, so I'm not going to be telling you how to read a table here, but you will need to be very clear yourself. When I say it is adjustable, if you've used a spreadsheet made by someone particularly good at Excel, you will know what I mean. You can organize the table according to any of the possible data columns. Okay, organize it by oldest, organize it by most popular, etc. This is the second time I'm going to use the phrase conditional statements, but these are much more what I, as a sort of card-carrying philosophy graduate and philosophy lover, would think of as a conditional statement. In these presentations, I've made up a few of my own words. The biggest shock is this if-thenisms. That's not my creation. That is the very common name we have for them. When I say if-thenisms, if something, then something else. We call those if-thenisms in the more analytical side of philosophy. So that's what I mean by if-thenisms. We'll talk a little bit more about that. This is another one where you get to mark one answer per row, but note you must get all three to get the credit. Okay, so I know most people would go, oh, table analysis, that's all fine. I've been reading tables for a long time. But don't get complacent with it. If you sort of just mark one of them incorrectly, you might as well have wasted the other two. Okay, study the table, particularly each column and row header. It's really easy to make a miscalculation because let's say you didn't notice at the top of the table, it says brackets in millions or something like that. Okay, really easy to sort of try and dive into it too quickly. And then at the end, you realize the numbers were in millions. And, you know, you got to go back and find out what you missed, what needs to be corrected. Study the condition given in the question. If you don't understand the if-thenism, are you going to be able to tell whether it is true or not? No. So even before you're sort of thinking about your answer, you need to think about what makes that if-thenism true. We're going to talk about that now. Don't worry, I'm not just leaving you to your own devices on that. But really notice what it would take for it to be true, what it would take for it to be false. Otherwise, you're going to look through the table and be none the wiser. Only once you've understood each condition and checked whether it applies should you be even close to giving an answer. So let's look at these if-thenisms. To analyze if-thenisms, you should look for the contradicting statement. I have a classic example up here. If a number is a multiple of 8, then it is even. I have two quote-unquote contradicting questions underneath. Which of these two, if sort of answered with a yes, would truly give us a contradiction of that statement? Which of those questions, if answered with a yes, would really contradict the statement given? Any ideas?
The first one.
Yeah, absolutely. We can find an even number which is not a multiple of 8, but that does not contradict the if-thenism at all. Me pointing out that the number 6 exists does not make any individual multiple of 8 odd, right? In other examples, it's even more obvious. I used in one of the other of the lectures, you can say, oh, if something is an eagle, it's a bird. Cool, hopefully no one objects. But if you put it the other way around, it's nonsense, right? If something's a bird, it's an eagle. No, we've got tons of other birds which exist in the world. So it will really be sort of, we keep the first part the same. If a number is a multiple of 8 and it's not even, then we have a problem. Then we have a problem, then we can falsify the condition. But you've got to work with these carefully. Okay, you've got to work with these carefully. You'll also get some people saying if it's not a multiple of 8, it's not even. That doesn't work either, right? 6 exists, as I said. So be careful with how you manipulate these. One thing that sounds kind of similar, but the difference is it's absolutely correct, is something called the contrapositive. Long word, slightly simpler application. So I said if a number is a multiple of 8, then it's even. You change the direction of the arrow, so you're sort of going this way to this way rather than this way to this way, and you negate both. So what that would mean is if it's not even, then it's not a multiple of 8. And that's still good, right? If a number is not even, it can't be a multiple of 8. So sort of making them both negative and changing the direction of the implication is legitimate, and it will give you a statement which is true only when the original statement is true, and false in the same way. Okay, you'll end up with what we call a logically equivalent statement, but there's only so much you need to know for an exam like this. So I've got a slightly different one here. So if a woman is over 18, then she's not a girl. Notice I've negated both of them. It was not a girl, and now we're starting with she is a girl. And the first one is a woman over 18, and then the second one is not. So if she's a girl, then she's not a woman over 18. That's how you correctly do the contrapositive. And now a task for you all. How do we find the contrapositive for this if-thenism? If I miss the 8:05 bus, I am going to be late for work. How do we find the contrapositive for this particular if-thenism? Remember, just negate both parts and give them a switch. What do we get?
I'm late for work, then I missed the 8:05 bus.
No, unfortunately, you haven't negated those. So you've done the swap, but you haven't negated them. The correct answer would be, if I'm not going to be late for work, then I did not miss the 8:05 bus. Okay? Negate them both and give them a flip round. Okay, so now I've given you some advice on how to deal with these if-thenisms. Again, I'm not assuming that anyone has any pre-existing experience with them. except I'm sure you use them frequently. You just maybe don't logically and philosophically analyze them. Let's look at what a question will look like for this. Notice that sort by. Again, I can't drop it down in the book, but you will be able to in the exam. Here, it's ordered by the data in that first column. Okay, second column, once we look at the fact that the first column is just foodstuffs. Okay, but it's ascending in that second column. But if going through the questions, you would prefer that it be ranked by world share of exports. You can do that. That's not going to be a problem. Now let's look at what specifically these conditional statements will look like here. First one is not an if-thenism. It's simply, is it true? Is it false? No individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. But this is all about Brazil. How can we possibly know about the rest of the world? Can we tell if no country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar supply?
Yes, because Brazil is the first in production per gram.
Yeah, absolutely. So they produce Brazil produces 21% of the world's sugar, which in itself would not be enough information. It's combined with the fact that that amount of sugar production puts them #1 in the world. So yeah, no one's going to be producing more than that. Okay, so it's enough for us to sort of look at this and go, yeah, that's going to be true. Now let's look at those conditional statements. If Brazil produces less than 20% of the world's supply of any commodity listed in the table, Brazil is not the world's top exporter of that commodity. So they haven't put the word then before Brazil, but it's implied, right? That's an if-thenism. If Brazil produces less than 20% of the world's supply, it's not the top exporter. So notice we can go here, and because we're already sorting it by the production percentage world share, it says if Brazil produces less than 20%. So we only need to check up until beef. Those are all the areas where Brazil produces less than 20% of the world's supply. We can see in that production column that none of those numbers are a 1. So yeah, that's all okay. In every instance where it is less than 20%, the world rank is less than sort of #1. So we can happily we can happily give a yes to this answer. What about the third one on the list? Do you notice anything about it? Of the commodities in the table for which Brazil ranks first in world exports, Brazil produces more than 20% of the world's supply. Even before I go back to the table, do you notice anything about that?
We can make a contrapositive.
Right idea, yeah. Actually, if we make a contrapositive out of it, what happens? Two and three are actually the same. Okay, because 3 is the contrapositive of number 2. You've swapped the conditions and negated both of them. So one says less than 20, one says more than 20, one says Brazil is not the top exporter, one says Brazil is the top exporter. It's a technicality, but they're both contrapositives of each other. Okay, because if you do that process twice, negating both of them and giving them a swap, and then you do it again, you end up right back where you started. So 2 and 3 are the same condition. If you give yes to one and no to the other, you have misunderstood what one of them means. Okay, either 2 and 3 are both yes or 2 and 3 are both no, because they're just different ways of phrasing the same thing. Okay. Let's look at the graphics interpretation. This is going to be one of our weaker sections, mainly because what you expect for this question is correct. Okay, they're going to give you a whole bunch of graphics. Maybe that's going to be a bar chart, a pie chart, a line chart. Okay, but as long as you're familiar with different, very common graphical displays of data, you're going to be fine. Again, my main piece of advice for this topic will be don't get complacent. Okay, these should be the easy marks for you to pick up. Don't make them the easy marks to throw away. The questions will be incomplete statements with drop-down boxes where you need to fill in the blank. Okay. Look at labels and scales carefully. Okay. Actually, when we look at the examples, the graphics which the book did supply for me, you're going to see that that example I mentioned earlier did not come from nowhere. One of the graphs has a y-axis which like says in billions in brackets. If you don't realize those are the units it's working in, you're going to be well on your way to throwing away the easy marks. So look at the labels and scales carefully and read the statement carefully. Then, specifically, once you've read the statement carefully, you need to be just as careful in making sure that the data you're grabbing from those graphics is the data which applies. Okay. Okay, so here we've got, you know, I don't know how many T-Rexes they surveyed or how they filled out with the very small hands. But here we have a graph for T-Rex age against T-Rex mass. Okay. I don't have questions relating to this graph. The questions will relate to the second one. But I want you to have another example of what it could look like. Okay, so here we do have a sort of more complete question. If one student is selected at random from the 300 students surveyed, the chance that they will be under 30, a high school graduate, or both is, and then you have that drop down box on your right hand side. So let's see how my advice applies to a question like this. Let's say, oh, I went to those lectures, he said some things, but I know what's best. And you just go right in and you start counting these little hourglasses, sideways bow ties. And then you go, okay, I have 11. And then you do 11 over 300. Oh, it comes out to a tiny percentage. And it's not one of the drop-down arrows. That's because you were so keen to dive into the question, you didn't notice that each of these symbols does not represent one student, it represents 10. Another mistake that could be easy is you dive straight into sort of counting them without being really clear with yourself, okay, which should I be counting? Should I be counting those in the middle section? Look at the bottom of the Venn diagram. Do I want things which are in or outside these circles? So, for example, it says people under 30. So actually anyone in that left-hand circle is out. A high school graduate. Actually anyone in that right-hand circle is out. So actually we are simply looking to count those at the top which appear in neither. We count up our 10, noticing 10 actually means 100 students, and then everything works out. The mouse is already over the correct answer. Okay, but if you try and rush, and let's say you decide you should count the ones which are in the left-hand circle, but not in the intersection, you can count correctly all you want, but you're counting the wrong thing. Okay. Let's look at the two-part analysis. This is the sort of other main topic where I do have a big long practice question for us to do. It's also after this section where, honestly, considering we started late, it might even come to under an hour. But at that point, I'll recommend that's when we have our break, because the second part will just be the data sufficiency, i.e. me explaining it. And for the data sufficiency, we do have plenty of practice questions. So let's look at the two-part analysis. Firstly, I haven't written it down here, but just like in the verbal skills, the hone your language skills section, yes, you have an average of so much time per question. You should generally aim to use under that amount, because this two-part analysis is likely to require more than the average. This is the main section which has large amounts of text. Okay? And that's why it's generally going to take you longer. I'm also going to be suggesting analysis before you even look at the answers. Again, you'll have a few tasks to do within the time frame. Your responses will be given in the form of a table with 2 columns. Notice that this is the example where or the question type where you pick one answer per column, not per row. So don't confuse yourself here. It is unlikely, but it is possible that both of your answers are within the same row. The practice question we're going to look at today, it won't be, because the two columns are contradictory in terms of information, but in some cases they won't be, and you can absolutely select both answers being in the same row. Okay, answer using all the only the information provided still applies. Let's talk about number 3, analyzing and understanding the conditions before you even look at the answers. A lot of the time, the conditions they're asking you to meet plus the initial information will already give you enough to get you on your way. To get your first foot on the ladder, you can start analyzing things so that once you get to actually looking at the answers, you have a way to expedite, speed up your process. You already know, hey, we're looking for this, or hey, we're looking for something else. Only then, once you've done that analysis as much as you can, should you be looking at the answers. As I said, this is the one with lots of text. So, as you're reading it through the first time, obviously you should be taking that information in, but I also want you to be doing this in your mind, right? I don't care if it's a literature department. I don't care whether the university is big or small. I don't care if it's in an English-speaking country. Okay, that contributes to why they want the conditions they want. But once they're telling me the conditions I need to meet, I don't care about their reasoning. Right? For example, they want the majority of writers scheduled for one of the days to be writers whose primary language is not English. The fact that they are doing that to reflect their department's strengths, I don't care about, right? That's the condition we need to meet. Their reason for doing so makes very little difference to my day. So it's actually, okay, we do need to know that there are 2 days. We do need to know that 5 writers will be featured each day. And we do need to know the conditions on the first day is having sort of a majority of writers with a primary language that's not English. And on the other day, we need at least 4 of the writers to be women. And our last condition really is that neither day should have more than 2 writers from the same country. So that is 3 conditions we need to be meeting. Even before I go on to the next page and show you these 8 that we have and the remaining options, we've got enough information here to start the analysis. The first condition says the majority of writers scheduled for one of the days, blah, de, blah, de, blah. We know there are 5 writers per day. So the majority means 3 or more. That's a good place to start, right? That's a good place to start. Also, I want you to think in terms of restrictions as well. So notice it says on one of the days, condition 1, on the other day, condition 2. It has not fixed that the first day should be the non-English writers. Okay, if they haven't specified it, bear in mind that you can still change and move that around to meet the conditions you require. If they don't specify it, you have a degree in flexibility for how you specify it. Okay. And they're on the same screen, but for right now, I just want you looking at sort of those 8 already confirmed writers. Notice that first day has 3 women and 2 non-native speakers. Notice that we already have 2 writers who are from the same country of origin. So we can immediately see whoever we're putting in that at the end of that first day cannot be French. We will break that last condition. Yeah, and we just need a majority of non-English writers. So as long as our third writer is sort of not French or English, you're going to be fine. But you even need to compare that to the second day. Notice that the second day already has 2 people from the same country of origin, i.e. the UK. We have 2 female speakers already, and 2 with a non-native language. This is already enough information for you without even looking at that bottom table to tell you that day 1 needs to be the female day, right? Because even if we add a female writer to day 2, we will only have 3 total. We are not meeting that condition, which requires us to have 4. So again, before we're even looking at the answer selection, I can tell you that sort of day 1 is going to be the day of our female writers, and day 2 is going to be the day of our non-English writers. So if day 1 is going to have a female writer, and we've noticed we need them to not be French because we can't have 3 people from the same country of origin. Notice you've already limited down your options of what you're looking for very nicely, and we haven't even looked at the answers yet. So when I'm talking about doing that sort of analysis before you get down to looking at the answers, that's what I mean. Okay, do broad analysis of where you are so far. It will give you a good idea of where you need to go. Okay. So, what do we think about getting to an answer for this question? Now we can imagine that we are indeed looking at that answer table. Also, to cut down your sort of thinking time, you can think of things which are generally going to be helpful, right? Looking down and seeing someone, for example, that is both female, speaks in a language or writes in a language which is not English, and comes from a country not currently being representative. In a situation like this, all 3 of those are universal positives for us to get towards an answer. So, who do we think is meeting those? So to me, Murasaki, though I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, she's ticking the female column, she's ticking the non-English writing language, and no one here No one here is Japanese so far either. So to me, she's definitely going to be involved. She's definitely going to be involved. Lastly, we can see that we need a non-native, a non-English writer to complete day 2. Okay, we need a non-English writer to complete day 2. Notice we've sort of already got our female day done, so we don't have to worry about that so much. What we do have to make sure is that they're not from the UK. They're not from the UK. So Vargas Llosa is looking like a good second choice, okay? But this is how I want you going through this process. Okay. As explained, I think this is the most pertinent time for us to have our break. But considering that it's going to be an hour each side rather than an hour and a half each side, I kindly suggest that we make the break only 20 minutes rather than half an hour. The quicker we restart, the quicker we go home. Okay, let's take a break here. Again, that clock is 5 minutes slow. So we should return at 5 o'clock. Okay, let's get going again then. Okay. So one topic left to talk about, but as previously mentioned, I'm expecting it to be the one you have the least pre-existing familiarity with. Let's talk about it. So the aim of the data sufficiency questions is not to give an answer, at least in terms of x equals 5, y equals whatever. The question we're looking to answer here is, does the information given give us enough information to find a definite and unique answer to the question? So if one piece of data or one piece of information could conceivably give us two answers, the answer is no, the data is not sufficient. So is the data sufficient is the question you are really answering, not necessarily the question they give you. This is sort of a challenge for your abstract reasoning, a challenge for understanding when this really could sort of only be one way, there could only be this one answer. But it's good news in terms of you don't actually have to do the implied mathematics. Okay, you do not need to sort of bear down and go through. You simply need to go, yes, it is enough information, or no, it is not. Though it's not quite that simple, these will not be yes or no. Here's what the actual answer options will look like. They will give you two statements. The question is, do you need just one to sort of get to a definite and unique answer? Do you need them both together? But notably, neither alone is enough information. Or statement E, which even when taken together, we simply do not have enough information to give a definite and unique answer to the question. So these answer options are going to be the same for absolutely every question. Let's look at what one of these, oh no, we've got some approach tips first. Okay, so we've got essentially here like a list of steps you can go through. In the textbook, it was also presented as kind of like a flow diagram. But really your steps are check each individually. That alone could be enough to give you an answer. If one of them is sufficient by itself and one of them is not, that's enough for you to answer the question without even going any further. If you get to that point and you don't have a definite answer, you should start considering both of them together. If you use those pieces of information together, is it then enough information to get to a definite and unique answer? Really, once you've gone through all those steps, if you haven't hit a yes, the answer is E. Even together, they are not sufficient. It can be really easy, particularly I'm going to highlight this top one. It's really easy if you're not used to this sort of question to at some point in your logic accidentally use the second one when you were meant to be using only the first, and indeed vice versa. So make sure you're being really strict with yourself when you're analyzing whether sort of one of these pieces of data is sufficient on its own. Make sure you're not accidentally dragging in that second one. I'm also going to highlight number 3, really to drive that point home. x squared equals 49 is not enough information on its own. You might need something else like x is below 0 before we get a definite and unique answer. And then we have this last point here. It does not have to be a definite yes. If you can hit a definite no, that is still enough information to answer the question. Not every question has to be an affirmative. Not every question has to be a yes. So make sure you don't sort of go into normal maths mode. A no answer of we simply do not have, or yeah, a no answer is still an answer. So here's what a question will look like in practice. Can I fill up the tank of 100-litre capacity completely? Measurements are accurate and there should be no overflow. Statement 1 is I have a bucket which can measure exactly 5 litres. And statement 2 is that they have a particularly big mug which can measure exactly 3 litres. Is it a matter of statement 1 alone being sufficient, statement 2 alone being sufficient? You need both of those implements together, or indeed, even together, they're not sufficient. What do we think? Any ideas? Statement 1 alone is sufficient. Statement 2 alone is not sufficient. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so I included this as my first example to really demonstrate what I've been trying to communicate. The answer here is D. We're not looking for answers which give us a yes. We're looking for answers which give us enough information. So, okay, if we're looking at statement 1, that's entirely enough information to go yes, we can do that. We just need 20 buckets, no problem. But even statement 2 alone is enough information. Not to say that we can do it, but to say that we can't. We do not need it to be a positive yes. We can absolutely take statement 2 on its own and say it is sufficient to answer the question. The answer to the question is a no. Okay, so I'm including this kind of as a trick question, but kind of also to highlight what this sort of should be going into. Okay. Let's have a look at another. Okay, I've only included one of the statements here, but I'm including it to make a point. Is this sufficient to tell me what X is? Because, okay, I have the advantage of being a full-time maths teacher. I can tell you the solutions to this equation are x equals 2 and x equals 3. But again, solving the maths is not really the task here. Knowledge of the maths is crucially important because even if you can't solve that in your head quickly and tell me that x is 2 or x is 3, you should know that in general quadratic equations give you 2 solutions. We are looking for a definite and a unique answer. If your answer is it could be 2 or it could be 3, it is not enough information. Maybe we would need another quadratic equation that has a solution, 2 solutions, one of which is 2 and one of which is 5. And then we can say, yes, together we do have a definite solution. You don't even have to write that it's 2. You just have to know that we have a definite and unique solution. What about this one? Again, remember, each one of them alone could be sufficient, but the other one is not. They could both be sufficient individually, or they could only be sufficient when taken together. What do we think for a unique and definite x?
First one is sufficient, second one is not.
Yeah, so we don't even need to go as far as combining them, because as soon as you look at them individually, firstly, the first one is enough on its own. X equals -3, there is no other cube root of -27. They're not expecting you to find the complex solutions to this equation. Okay, so we don't even need the second one to begin with, but we should still check, because it might be the statement 2 is also sufficient on its own. And that will bring us to D. They're both sufficient on their own. But no. They will occasionally throw things at you which highlight particularly the difference between the deductive power of even and odd powers. Right, so for the second one, we have two solutions. It could be x equals 3, or it could be x equals -3. But for these odd powers, or indeed these odd roots, there is only one solution. Okay, it will just be x equals -3 to begin with. The answer here will be A, that statement 1 is sufficient on its own, and statement 2 is never sufficient. And notice that even though when we take them together, they both give us they give us x equals -3. The second statement is contributing nothing to that, so we don't take the together option. The deductive power is coming from the first statement and the first statement alone. Okay, I'll give you a second to read. I don't want to rush everyone. Any initial thoughts before I start taking you through this one? So, I mean, hopefully the clear thing here is that the first statement alone is enough. They are covering 50 kilometers in 3/4 of an hour. We don't have to work out what speed that's going to be, but we've got a distance, we've got a time, that's enough for a speed. The more concerning one is this second setup. When you're looking at a piece of information like this, but for example, if the question was to mathematically calculate it, you'd sit there and go, maybe I can do that, but I wouldn't exactly be sure how to do it. Good news, you don't have to. But what I do want to recommend to you is a way you can think about, is it sufficient information, without necessarily going through all those calculations. And that is, could they be going at a different speed than they are without any of those numbers changing? Right? Okay, the train going faster isn't going to change the length. That's fine. But if the person is still walking at the same speed, If they were going at a different speed, even without calculating it, you can tell that it would take a longer time, right? The train's not changing length, the man's not changing speed. If the train was a different speed than it really is, it would definitely have to take either more time or less time. You don't have to go through that calculation to really go, oh no, it could only be one speed. It could only be one speed. So actually, either of these alone are sufficient. So we're going for option D. Either of these alone is sufficient. I've included one like this because I'm going to explain something they like and then carefully warn you that it doesn't always apply. They will love giving you questions where they're asking for, let's say, the number of girls in a class, etc. And then they'll give you a proportion, right? Maybe 40% of the class are girls, etc. But that itself will not be enough information unless they're maybe talking about a probability, etc. But if they're looking for an exact number, they'll give you percentages or like something which can be scaled or a ratio like this. But for us to actually turn that into a definite number, we'll need some extra information. Maybe a total number of students would be the most obvious piece of information to give us. Or maybe they give us a ratio and then they give us the number of boys. That will also be enough information. But one of the things they love to do is give you a proportion, a ratio, and they need you to recognize, oh, okay, if we're looking for a specific number of people, that's a start. But any of our solutions, we could just multiply everything by 5. We'll still be in that ratio. Multiply everything by 10, whatever. So we need something to fix that. So, what is the ratio of the prices A and B? 3 years ago, their prices were in a ratio of 4:5. In the last 3 years, both A and B have increased by 5,000 rupees. They'll use that currency often. If you don't know, it's an Indian company. So, have a little think. Is 1 on its own sufficient? Is 2 on its own sufficient? Do we need to use them together? Are they both sufficient on their own? Or even taken together, they are strictly not sufficient?
Even together, they are not sufficient.
Absolutely correct. Even together, they are not sufficient. Okay? Let's say, for example, and when you're going through these, create situations in your mind which meet both of these conditions, and then see if you have enough flexibility to make the answer definite and not unique. So, for example, meeting the first condition, maybe A was 400 and B was 500. If we add 5,000 to both of those, we'll get a ratio of 5,400 to 5,500. We can simplify that, but that's a good starting point. But what if it was, A was literally 4 and B was literally 5? Then we're going to get a ratio of 5,004 to 5,005. Hopefully you can see I just got 2 very different ratios whilst meeting both of those conditions. That is a dead sign that it's not enough information. So yeah, absolutely, Even taken together, these are not enough information. What is the son's age in 2008? In 2008, the sum of the son's age and the mother's age is equal to the father's age. Second statement, the parents married in 98 when the father was 30 and the mother was 20. Just like I suggested in that sort of logic section I taught on the first week, I want you to think about what information is the question asking for, because if that relevant sort of information is not included in the condition, you know it's not going to be enough on its own. You're going to need something connecting the information in the question to the information in your answer. So from that alone, I can tell you that statement 2 is not sufficient on its own. It's not even mentioning the son. Right? It's not even mentioning the son. How are we possibly going to find out the son's age when they're not even mentioned? So we can get rid of that option quite quickly. Option 2 is definitely not going to be sufficient on its own accord. Similarly, for question 1, okay, we are talking about the son's age. And we're talking about 2008. That's a good sign we're at least talking in the same terms as the question is. However, we've got sort of 3 variables, if you want to think in those terms. We've got the mum's age, the dad's age, and the son's age. To actually turn that into a definite answer for the son's age, we are going to need more information. So my real question for you is, are they sufficient together? Good, well-timed nod. Absolutely they are. So notice the key piece of information in the second statement is not even one that's written explicitly. It's the difference between the mother's and the father's age. You don't have to track the fact that, 10 years later the father is 40 and the mother is 30. What you need to track is that age difference is what the age difference is, right? At no point is the age difference changing. So if the age difference is 10 years, and in 2008, the son's age plus the mother's age is the father's age, in 2008, the son's age is 10. So, they didn't exactly hold back between the wedding and the baby. Okay, but you don't need to do the maths, you need to do the logic. Even if you get the feeling like, okay, that's enough to restrict, there's no possible alternative scenario I could make with a different age for the son, which still meets both of these conditions, you don't have to really consciously work out that the son's age is 10. You just need to work out that it's determinable. What percentage of a group of people are men with master's degrees? 1 of all the men in the group, 25% have master's degrees. Second statement, of all the women in the group, 30% have master's degrees. What are we thinking? Any ideas?
Not sufficient even together.
Yeah, not sufficient even together. Okay, and I want you to take yourself through that process I took you through. Maybe we have simply 4 men in the group and one of them has a master's degree. And we have 100 women and 30 of them have master's degrees. But I could flip those and make it a massive majority of men. Yeah, we'll have an implied percentage of however many of them have master's degrees, but what is being asked about can absolutely be scaled and adjusted while still meeting these conditions. You can partition them how you want, but when you're talking about sort of which percentage is which, you're going to need a statement which talks about that. If a is an integer, is a plus 1 even? What do we think? Hopefully you can see that statement 1 on its own is sufficient. Not to say that a plus 1 is even, but to give a definite and unique answer to the question, i.e. no, right? If the next number is even, a plus 1 is definitely not even. Is statement 2 on its own enough? Is statement 2 on its own enough? Yeah, because if a minus 1 is odd, then a is even, and a plus 1 is odd. Again, we're not looking for a necessary yes answer, we are looking for a necessary answer. So actually here, either of them alone are enough. Notice we're not going to tick the sort of together they are sufficient, because even alone they are sufficient. We do not need to cross-reference both pieces of information. Okay. In a classroom, one student is to be selected at random to solve a question. What is the probability that a girl will be selected?
First is sufficient.
Okay, cool. The first is sufficient on its own. What about number 2?
Not sufficient.
Yeah, so this is kind of the opposite direction of what I was talking about a couple of moments ago. Sometimes they'll give you a proportion, but what you really need is an actual specific number. Here, it's the other way around. In number 2, they're giving you an actual specific number, but it's the proportion which counts. Okay, maybe 15 of the students in the classroom are boys, but maybe there's 100 students overall, maybe there's 1,000, maybe there's 16, right? We can't work out a proportion until we know of what's the total. But here, just knowing that 2/5 of the students are boys is enough, okay? Also assuming the gender binary, let's say, but it is enough information on its own. And notice we don't need to combine the second one whatsoever. Okay, so even you would not pick the together option. Okay, if you consider them together, that is enough information, but purely because the first one was enough information anyway. Okay, purely because the first one was enough information anyway. This is one of the questions I highlighted because I want to make you all really, really happy that you don't have to do the actual maths. But I have given you enough information subtly to answer this question. Okay, what thoughts do we have? Giving it by little way of a hint, just like x squared equals 9 has two solutions, but x cubed equals 27 only has one, because the latter is an odd power. The same logic works for roots. Well, if we're not sure, maybe let me take you through something which would be a reasonable train of thought as far as I am concerned. Firstly, let's think about what y is. Okay, in the first case, it's 12 to the power of 7. But what we really, you don't need to do that in your calculator, though I will remind you that you do have a calculator at your disposal. All you need to know is that it's a positive number, let's say. Same thing for number 2, right? Y will be 2 to the power of 22. You don't really need to know what it is. What is important is that it will be positive. Okay? And the cube root of a positive number will be both positive and unique. So actually, either of these alone is sufficient. Okay, you don't have to do 12 to the power of 7 and then cube root it. We just need to know that the cube root is unique. Okay, and the 7th and the 22nd roots here are sort of mainly throwing you off. It's the cube roots in the question which is important. Because let's say we did all this and it was talking about the square root. After all that, we'll end up with a big positive number and we're looking at the square root, and there will be 2. So it will not be definite, it will not be unique. I'm including this one to highlight what I said at the beginning. You will be required to use your math skills, even if it's not in explicit calculation. It will be certain broad mathematical ideas, etc. So, in a triangle ABC, AB is x units, BC is x plus 4, and AC is y. Which of the 3 vertex angles, or which corner has the greatest angle, the greatest degree measure? if you're looking at this wondering, let me give you a sneak hint that the piece of general mathematics knowledge you need here is that the biggest angle is opposite the biggest side. Right, hopefully you can visualize that in your mind and it makes sense. The biggest corner is opposite the biggest side. So which of these is going to give you enough information? Let me draw your attention to the fact that statement 2 is not enough. Okay? It doesn't even sort of help us a little bit, to be honest. Because what matters here is an ordering, right? Which side is our shortest? Which side is our second shortest? Those don't matter so much as long as we can find the longest. But even in those first two instances, x equals 4 does not help us at all. We already know that BC is longer than A. BC is longer than AB. We do not need to know anything about x. Okay, we already know that side BC is longer. What we really need to decide is BC longer than AC? You can make x whatever you want. As long as we are ignorant of y, we have no way to answer that question. So actually x equals 4 doesn't help us whatsoever. However, statement 1 on its own is sufficient. Okay, we don't need to know what x is, but we can see that AC would then be 4 longer than BC. That's enough information. It will specifically be the corner which is opposite to side AC. But as I've been repeating and just really trying to drive home, that doesn't even matter. What matters is that we have enough information to go, yes, that one. Okay, I won't be reading these out. What do we think? If you're struggling, remember, try and meet both conditions with a scenario in your head. See if you can customize and change that scenario in your head to get different answers to the original question while still meeting both of the given conditions.
Not sufficient even together.
Yeah, even together they're not sufficient. To be honest, it is very similar logic to this one. Right? They're talking about of all men and they're talking about of all women. Here they're talking about of all Indian students and they're talking about of all non-Indian students, but the same problem applies. Maybe there are 5 Indian students at the entire school and simply one of them attends the debating club. Equally, maybe there are 500 Indian students, maybe the school is literally in India, and 100 of those attend the debating club. Okay, there is too much flexibility here. Too much flexibility. Okay, we've got a couple more to be getting on with, but we are approaching the end of the selection. Any thoughts? I know if, as I said, I'm not expecting any of you to be used to this sort of process. It is a bit of a difficult one to sort of reprogram your brain to. So I understand that it's a bit difficult just having a bunch of these chucked at you. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about whether statement 1 is sufficient on its own. It's clearly not. Okay. Is statement 2 sufficient on its own? No. The key question here, and I'm sure the point which you're all getting a bit stuck at very reasonably, is trying to deduce if even together they are enough information. I've included this question for a specific reason, and I want to give you a way to sort of go through that. Okay, what I've told you before still works. But I want to highlight here that we have a lovely mix of addition and multiplication. If it was simply addition, or indeed subtraction when we're talking about less, you could take these prices and you could move them left and right along the number line. It's not going to change the condition, right? It will still be 5 rupees less, 5 rupees more. You can move them up and down the number line. Similarly, if all of these talks about multiplication, we have a similar issue as we do with the proportions of the classes. We could just double all numbers and we would get another solution. We could just triple all numbers, we could just half all numbers. That would not be unique. The reason that this actually is enough information when we consider them together is we have a lovely mix of both. So we can't just shift our answers up and down the number line. We can't sort of stretch and squeeze them in the way that we can with proportions. This is a good thing to look out for when you're trying to essentially realize, okay, this is a 3-part simultaneous equation. Again, good news that you don't have to solve it, but if you're not going to solve it, you need to know a way to think about it without doing so. So keeping an eye on this, is it multiplication, is it addition? Both of those will not be sufficient on their own. It's having a combination of the two which is going to allow us to fix values. Oh, that really was the last one. Okay. So thank you very much. I will, just to end us off, knowing that it is our last of the 4 sessions. I am going to, as we did last year, upload these presentations that I've used across all 4 of these lecture series to the Corvinus website. They were uploaded last year. They will be uploaded again this year. For the people that have attended all of the sessions, you might, in some instances, think that I included too many practice questions, particularly in the hone your language one. I included way more than we ever used. I did that on purpose because the most common and by far the most reasonable question I'm getting is, where can I find practice questions? I unfortunately can't give you access to the website and the absolutely massive textbook I've been using for the past 4 weeks. It's just not within my power. What I can do is make sure that those presentations are uploaded, and every practice question that is in my presentations, you therefore have access to. Okay. Including the online people, I will absolutely answer any questions if we have them. And of course, the people in the room as well. I'm just addressing that beforehand. because I suspect otherwise that would be the most common question. Do we have anything else we're looking to know? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions online. Okay, just for the people in the room then, do we have any questions remaining that I have not just addressed? Yeah.
So would you recommend subscribing to a GMAT course online for preparation?
That is a decision strictly for you and your wallet. So that is the sort of main reason I can't provide you with as many practice questions as I would like to. I get provided with them because it would be unrealistic to expect me to teach without them. Other than that, I'm afraid it will be an associated fee. So that's for you and your wallet to decide. Any others? No, in that case, I'll call this our earliest finish of the 4 sessions, and I thank you for both your patience and your attendance. Good luck with the exam. Okay, thank you, Thierry. I'll pass that on to the people in the room. It's also worth mentioning that apparently they're going to publish a sample exam on their website. So keep an eye out for that, okay? So Alfred, I've just seen the question, but I've already answered it. Unfortunately, I can't provide direct sample questions to you. I just don't have the materials. I have deliberately included a lot of practice questions in my presentations because those will be uploaded in a place you can find them, and then you can look through them at your own pace. But I'm afraid I can't direct you to a specifically free question bank. Okay, thank you very much. That's going to be the end for today.